What happens when Hollywood royalty meets late-night television's most fearless host? In just 37 seconds, one explosive comment would turn a routine interview into television chaos, exposing the shocking entitlement of a former duchess who thought she could steamroll America's favorite truth-teller. The Fox News studio buzzed with unusual energy that evening. Greg Gutfeld adjusted his tie and glanced at his notes one final time before the cameras rolled. Tonight's guest lineup promised to be interesting, but nobody could have predicted the verbal warfare about to unfold. "Welcome back to Gutfeld," Greg said with his signature smirk. "I'm here with Meghan Markle, who apparently has some thoughts about American politics she'd like to share with us common folk." Meghan's smile faltered slightly at the introduction, but she maintained her composure. "Thank you for having me, Greg, though I should mention, I've always considered myself quite relatable to everyday Americans." "Relatable?" Greg repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Right. So living in a $16 million mansion in Montecito while lecturing people about climate change? That's relatable?" "I think you're missing the point," Meghan replied, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "My platform allows me to reach people who need to hear important messages about social justice and environmental responsibility." Greg leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. "Your platform. See, that's interesting word choice. Most people would call it privilege, but you call it a platform. Help me understand the difference." The studio audience sensed the tension building. Meghan shifted in her seat, her media training kicking in as she attempted to regain control of the narrative. "I've worked hard for everything I have," she said, her voice rising slightly. "I was an actress long before I married into the royal family, and I've used my experiences to advocate for those without a voice." "An actress?" Greg nodded thoughtfully. "On a cable show that most people couldn't name if their life depended on it. But please, continue about advocating for the voiceless while living behind gates that cost more than most people's houses." Meghan's composure began to crack. "I don't think you understand the sacrifices I've made. Do you have any idea what it's like to give up your entire life, your career, your freedom for duty?" "Your freedom?" Greg's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Lady, you walked away from the royal family because you didn't like the rules, moved to California, and signed deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. If that's sacrifice, sign me up." "You clearly don't understand the complexities of my situation," Meghan snapped, her polished facade beginning to slip. "The media scrutiny, the racism, the complete lack of support from the institution I married into." Greg held up a hand. Hold on. So you married into arguably the most privileged family on earth, discovered it came with responsibilities and expectations, and when things got tough, you took your ball and went home to make Netflix deals? "It's not that simple," Meghan insisted, her voice getting louder. "You're oversimplifying a deeply complex situation involving mental health, family dynamics, and institutional racism." "Mental health," Greg repeated. "Right, because nothing says mental health struggle like primetime television interviews and multi-million-dollar production deals. Look, I get it. Life in a palace must be really tough when you have to follow protocol." The audience began to murmur, sensing the interview spiraling out of control. Meghan's jaw tightened as she fought to maintain her composure. "I think you're being incredibly dismissive of real trauma," she said through gritted teeth. "Perhaps if you understood what it was like to have your privacy invaded, your every move scrutinized, your character assassinated by tabloids." Greg chuckled. "Privacy invaded? You literally went on Oprah and aired your family's dirty laundry to 300 million people. If you wanted privacy, maybe don't do tell-all interviews on national television." "That interview was necessary," Meghan shot back. "I had to tell my truth to set the record straight about what really happened behind closed doors." "Your truth," Greg emphasized. "Not the truth, but your truth. See, that's the problem right there. There's only one truth, and it doesn't change based on your feelings or your bank account." Meghan's hands clenched in her lap. "I suppose someone like you wouldn't understand the nuances of living in the public eye while trying to protect your family and your integrity." "Someone like me?" Greg's eyes lit up. "Oh, this is rich. Please enlighten us about what someone like me wouldn't understand. I'm all ears." The studio fell silent. Even the camera operators seemed to lean in, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Meghan's carefully constructed public persona was unraveling in real time. "You're a comedian," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You make jokes for a living. You've never had to navigate complex family relationships while representing an entire nation. You've never had your words twisted, your actions misinterpreted, your motives questioned by people who've never met you." Greg's smile widened. "A comedian, huh? Well, this comedian built a career from nothing, works every single day, and doesn't lecture people about their carbon footprint while flying on private jets. But please, continue explaining why your problems are so much more important than everyone else's. I never said my problems were more important, Meghan protested, but her voice lacked conviction. I simply said you couldn't understand the unique challenges I've faced. Unique challenges, Greg repeated slowly. Like choosing between staying in a palace or moving to a mansion? Like deciding whether to sign with Netflix or Spotify first? Yeah, those are real hardships. They keep me up at night. Meghan's face flushed red. You're being deliberately obtuse. I'm talking about systemic issues, about representation, about using my position to create positive change in the world. Positive change, Greg nodded. Such as dividing families, playing the victim while cashing checks, and teaching people that when things get difficult, the solution is to quit and blame everyone else? I didn't quit, Meghan said sharply. I made a strategic decision to prioritize my mental health and my family's well-being over an institution that refused to protect us. Greg leaned forward. Strategic decision. That's corporate speak for quitting, but with better PR. Look, I respect anyone who wants to leave a job they don't like. Just don't pretend you're some kind of martyr for doing it. Martyr? Meghan's voice rose. I never claimed to be a martyr. I simply shared my experiences to help other people who might be going through similar struggles. Similar struggles? Greg laughed. Right. Because so many people can relate to the struggle of being a millionaire princess who had to follow rules. I'm sure viewers are nodding along, thinking about their own palace problems. The audience began to shift uncomfortably. What started as entertaining television was becoming genuinely awkward as Meghan's composure continued to deteriorate. You know what? Meghan said, her voice shaking with barely controlled anger. I came here thinking we could have an intelligent conversation about important issues. Instead, I'm being mocked by someone who clearly has no understanding of the broader implications of representation and social responsibility. Intelligent conversation, Greg repeated. About what? About how hard it is to be rich and famous? About how unfair it is when people expect you to honor commitments you made voluntarily? Help me find the intelligence in that conversation. Meghan stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. The camera zoomed in on her face, capturing every micro-expression of her growing fury. Sit down, Greg said calmly, gesturing to her chair. We're not done here. Meghan remained standing, her hands trembling slightly. Actually, we are done. I don't have to sit here and listen to this disrespectful treatment. Disrespectful? Greg's eyebrows shot up. Lady, asking questions isn't disrespectful. It's called journalism, something you might not be familiar with since most of your interviews involve softball questions and predetermined talking points. You're not asking questions? Meghan shot back, pointing an accusatory finger at him. You're launching personal attacks disguised as commentary. There's a difference between journalism and bullying. Greg laughed out loud. Bullying? I'm bullying you? The woman who went on international television and accused her in-laws of racism without providing a single concrete example? That's rich. I never accused anyone specifically, Meghan said defensively. I shared my lived experience with unconscious bias and institutional racism. Lived experience? Greg repeated mockingly. Another buzzword. You know what my lived experience tells me? That actions speak louder than words, and your actions show someone who throws tantrums when life doesn't go exactly the way she planned. Meghan's voice rose to nearly a shout. You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. The royal family made it clear from day one that I would never be accepted, never be protected, never be treated as an equal member of the family. Never be accepted, Greg said, shaking his head. They gave you a royal wedding watched by billions of people, a title, multiple homes, a staff, and a platform bigger than most world leaders. But sure, you were totally rejected. Material things don't equal acceptance, Meghan snapped. Behind closed doors, it was a completely different story. The lack of support, the deliberate isolation, the refusal to defend me against vicious media attacks. Greg stood up now too, matching her energy. Defend you against what? Against people pointing out inconsistencies in your statements? Against asking why you needed 18 different outfits for a 2-day trip while preaching about environmental consciousness? Those are perfect examples of the impossible standards I was held to, Meghan said, her voice cracking with emotion. Everything I did was scrutinized, criticized, twisted into something negative. No matter how hard I tried, it was never good enough. Maybe because you weren't trying hard enough, Greg said bluntly. Maybe because you thought the rules didn't apply to you. Maybe because you believed your own hype and forgot that being royal means serving others, not the other way around. Meghan's face contorted with rage. How dare you question my commitment to service? I've spent my entire adult life advocating for women's rights, for equality, for social justice. What have you done besides make jokes and tear people down? I've never pretended to be something I'm not, Greg replied evenly. I've never lectured people about causes while living a lifestyle that contradicts every word I say. I've never abandoned family commitments because they were harder than I expected. I didn't abandon anything, Meghan screamed, losing all semblance of control. I was pushed out by people who couldn't handle having a strong, independent woman in their ranks. They wanted a silent, compliant puppet, and when I refused to play that role, they made my life hell. The studio audience gasped at her outburst. Greg remained calm, clearly relishing the moment as Meghan's mask slipped completely away. Strong and independent, he said quietly. Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I sit, it looks like someone who couldn't handle criticism, couldn't adapt to expectations, and ran away the moment things got challenging. You don't know what you're talking about, Meghan said through gritted teeth. You've never been in a situation where your mental health was at stake, where you felt trapped and voiceless and completely alone. Voiceless? Greg's voice rose with incredulity. You had access to the biggest platform in the world. You could have addressed any concern directly, worked within the system, used your position to create the change you claim to care about. Instead, you chose to burn bridges and play victim. Meghan began pacing behind her chair like a caged animal. The system was never going to change from within. Sometimes you have to step outside to create real impact, to show people that there's another way. Another way, Greg nodded. Right. The American way. Come to Hollywood, sign some deals, do some interviews, and pretend you're changing the world while counting your money. Very inspiring. At least I'm trying to make a difference, Meghan shot back. At least I'm using my voice to speak up for people who can't speak for themselves. What are you contributing to society besides cynicism and negativity? Greg smiled broadly. I'm entertaining people. I'm making them laugh. I'm asking the questions that other people are too polite or too scared to ask. And apparently, I'm exposing entitled celebrities who think their problems are more important than everyone else's. Entitled? Meghan's voice reached a fever pitch. I am not entitled. I worked for everything I have. I earned my success through talent, hard work, and determination. Nobody handed me anything. Greg burst out laughing. Nobody handed you anything? Your entire current career is based on marrying a prince. Without that royal connection, you'd still be a supporting character on a cable drama that got canceled. That's completely unfair, Meghan protested, her voice breaking. I had a successful career before I met Harry. I was building something meaningful, something that mattered. Building what? Greg pressed. A few seasons on a show nobody watched? Some lifestyle blog that got minimal traffic? Face it. Marrying into royalty was the best career move you ever made, and you blew it because you couldn't handle the responsibilities that came with it. Meghan stopped pacing and turned to face him directly, her eyes blazing with fury. You know what? This is exactly the kind of misogynistic, reductive thinking that I've been fighting against my entire life. Reducing a woman's accomplishments to who she married, dismissing her voice, questioning her motives. Here we go, Greg said, rolling his eyes. When all else fails, play the gender card. It's not about you being a woman. It's about you being someone who makes promises she can't keep and commitments she won't honor. Commitments? Meghan's voice turned shrill. What about their commitment to protect me? What about their commitment to treat all family members equally? What about their commitment to basic human decency? Greg shook his head slowly. You really don't get it, do you? The royal family isn't your personal protection service. It's an institution with centuries of tradition, protocol, and expectations. You don't get to show up and demand they change everything to accommodate your feelings. My feelings? Meghan was practically screaming now. We're talking about my safety, my mental health, my basic well-being. But I guess none of that matters, as long as the precious institution remains unchanged. Your safety was never in danger, Greg said firmly. Your comfort zone was threatened. Your ego was bruised. Your expectations weren't met. But let's not pretend you were in actual danger from people asking you to follow the same rules everyone else has to follow. Meghan began gathering her things from the side table, her hands shaking with rage. I don't have to stand here and listen to this character assassination. I came here in good faith to have a meaningful conversation, and instead, I'm being attacked by someone who clearly has no respect for what I've been through. Good faith? Greg called out as she moved toward her purse. You came here to promote yourself and your brand, just like every other celebrity who sits in that chair. The difference is, most of them don't pretend they're saving the world while doing it. Meghan whirled around, her carefully styled hair now disheveled, her makeup smudged from the studio lights, and her emotional outburst. You are the most arrogant, ignorant, small-minded person I have ever had the misfortune to encounter. No wonder this country is so divided when people like you have platforms to spread your toxic negativity. The studio fell completely silent. Even the crew members stood frozen, unsure of how to respond to such an unprecedented meltdown on live television. Greg, however, remained completely composed, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Greg slowly clapped his hands together, the sound echoing through the stunned studio. And there it is, folks, the real Meghan Markle. When the talking points run out, when the victim narrative falls apart, what's left? Personal attacks and name-calling. Meghan's chest heaved as she struggled to regain her composure, but it was too late. The damage was done, broadcast live to millions of viewers who had just witnessed her complete meltdown. I'm not doing personal attacks, she said weakly, her voice hoarse from shouting. I'm just calling out your behavior for what it is. You've been hostile and disrespectful from the moment I sat down. Hostile? Greg laughed, gesturing to the cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, asking follow-up questions is now considered hostile behavior. Taking note of contradictions in someone's public statements is disrespectful. This is what passes for accountability in celebrity culture. Meghan clutched her purse tighter, her knuckles white with tension. You weren't asking questions. You were making accusations. You weren't seeking truth. You were trying to humiliate me on national television. Humiliate you? Greg's voice remained maddeningly calm. I didn't make you stand up and start screaming. I didn't make you call me names. I didn't make you lose control of yourself in front of millions of people. You did all that on your own. The truth of his words hit Meghan like a physical blow. She looked around the studio, seeing the shocked faces of crew members, the wide eyes of audience members, the red lights of cameras that had captured every second of her breakdown. You provoked me, she said desperately, trying to salvage some dignity from the wreckage of the interview. You deliberately pushed my buttons, tried to make me react emotionally instead of rationally. I asked you questions, Greg said simply. Basic questions that any journalist worth their salt would ask. If those questions provoked you into having a public meltdown, maybe the problem isn't with the questions. Meghan's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, the constant scrutiny, the impossible expectations. Sometimes people just reach their breaking point. Everyone's under pressure, Greg replied, his tone surprisingly gentle now. The difference is, most people don't have the luxury of quitting their responsibilities and moving to California when things get tough. Most people have to find ways to cope, to adapt, to keep going, even when it's hard. It wasn't just hard, Meghan said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. It was impossible. The whole system was designed to break me down, to make me fail. No matter what I did, it was wrong. No matter how hard I tried, it wasn't enough. Greg leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. Maybe it wasn't about trying harder. Maybe it was about trying differently. Maybe it was about accepting that being royal means the job comes first, the institution comes first, and personal comfort comes second. Personal comfort? Meghan's voice cracked. We're not talking about comfort. We're talking about basic human dignity, about being treated like a person instead of a prop. A prop, Greg repeated thoughtfully. You know what? You're right about something. The royal family probably did see you as a prop at first, a way to modernize their image, to appeal to younger people, to show they were inclusive and progressive. But here's the thing about props in the real world. They're only valuable if they play their assigned role. Meghan stared at him, speechless for the first time since the interview began. The brutal honesty of his words cut through all her prepared responses and rehearsed talking points. You were supposed to be the breath of fresh air, Greg continued, his voice taking on an almost educational tone. The American actress who brought Hollywood glamour to dusty old traditions. But somewhere along the way, you decided you were bigger than the role, more important than the institution, entitled to rewrite centuries of protocol to suit your personal preferences. That's not what happened, Meghan protested weakly, but her voice lacked conviction. I just wanted to be authentic, to be myself, to use my position to make a positive difference. Authentic. Greg nodded. Right. Authentic like demanding privacy while courting publicity. Authentic like preaching about climate change while taking private jets. Authentic like claiming to want a quiet life while doing tell-all interviews and Netflix documentaries. Meghan opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. For perhaps the first time in years, she found herself without a comeback, without a soundbite, without a way to spin the conversation back in her favor. You know what's really sad about this whole situation? Greg asked, his voice surprisingly sympathetic. You had everything, literally everything. A platform to change the world, a family with resources beyond imagination, the love and support of millions of people who were genuinely excited to welcome you. I know, Meghan whispered, her earlier anger replaced by something that looked almost like regret. I know what I had, but you don't understand how isolating it was, how controlled everything felt, how impossible it was to be genuine when every word was scripted and every appearance was choreographed. Greg stood up and walked around his desk, moving closer to where Meghan stood frozen near her chair. Here's what I think happened. I think you confused being famous with being important. I think you mistook attention for respect. And I think you believed that being royal meant everyone would automatically value your opinions on subjects you knew nothing about. I never thought I was more important than anyone else, Meghan said, but her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. Then why did you think the rules shouldn't apply to you? Greg asked pointedly. Why did you think centuries of tradition should change to accommodate your comfort level? Why did you think your personal happiness was more important than your public duties? Meghan had no answer. She stood there in the bright studio lights, her perfectly crafted public image lying in ruins around her feet, exposed as someone who had never truly understood the magnitude of what she had walked away from. I need to go, she said finally, her voice barely audible above the hum of the studio equipment. Of course you do, Greg said, returning to his seat. When things get uncomfortable, when the questions get too real, when the spotlight reveals more than you intended to show, you leave. It's what you do. Meghan took a shaky step toward the exit, then stopped and turned back to face him one final time. You think you've won something here tonight, don't you? You think you've proven some kind of point by reducing me to this. I didn't reduce you to anything, Greg replied calmly. You showed everyone exactly who you are when the cameras are rolling and the pressure is on. You showed them what happens when someone used to getting their way meets someone who refuses to play along with the fantasy. This isn't over, Meghan said, though her threat sounded more like a plea. Greg smiled, that same infuriating smile he had worn throughout the entire confrontation. Yes, it is. It was over the moment you stood up and started screaming instead of answering questions. It was over the moment you chose emotion over logic, accusations over accountability. Meghan turned toward the exit, her heels clicking against the studio floor with each unsteady step. But Greg wasn't finished yet. Hey Meghan, he called out, causing her to pause without turning around. Next time you want to lecture people about service and sacrifice, maybe pick an audience that doesn't remember what those words actually mean. She didn't respond. She couldn't respond. With whatever dignity she had left, Meghan Markle walked off the set of Gutfeld, leaving behind her microphone, her composure, and any pretense that she was anything other than exactly what Greg had said she was. Someone who quit when things got hard and blamed everyone else for her own choices. Greg turned back to the cameras, his expression shifting from confrontational to conversational, as if nothing unusual had happened. Well, folks, that was educational. Sometimes the most revealing interviews are the ones where people forget they're supposed to be performing. The audience sat in stunned silence, still processing what they had just witnessed. In the span of one interview, they had seen a carefully constructed public persona completely disintegrate, revealing the entitled, volatile person underneath the polished exterior. You know what the really interesting thing is? Greg continued, settling back into his chair as if he hadn't just delivered the most devastating interview takedown in recent television history. She actually proved every point I was trying to make, and she did it better than I ever could have. Sometimes the best way to expose someone is just to give them enough rope. The cameras continued rolling as Greg seamlessly transitioned into his closing segment, but everyone knew that the real show was already over. In just 37 minutes, Meghan Markle had destroyed her own credibility more thoroughly than any critic ever could, and she had done it all by herself, in front of millions of witnesses who would never forget what they had seen. The queen of victimhood had finally met her match in a comedian who refused to play her games. And the result was television gold that would be replayed, analyzed, and remembered long after both participants had moved on to other battles. But only one of them would emerge with their reputation intact, And it wasn't the one who had stormed off stage in a fit of rage. Greg Gutfeld had done what seemed impossible. He had gotten Meghan Markle to tell the truth about herself, even if she hadn't meant to do it.